Elsewhere, a battle was unfolding. The hero called upon his holy sword, urging it to respond and manifest, then unleashed an energy wave toward the demons. Ishua, their support, recognized that the hero's Excalibur skill was powerful, but it carried a heavy drawback as it consumed a large amount of mana. With the hero using it repeatedly, maintaining mana became a top priority. The battle pressed on as the other party members activated their own abilities, including the Magic Sword Graham, Thunder of Judgment, and Holy Nova. Ishua used his skill on the magician, restoring her mana so she could continue casting. Without delay, he repaired the magic sword, allowing the swordswoman to keep fighting against the enemies. He then turned to the healer, acknowledging that she was the last to have her mana restored, and urged her to continue healing and applying buffs. Through his efforts, the entire party's mana remained full. Ishua took responsibility for managing their mana and pushed the whole party to keep advancing. A few days later, the hero, Alan, declared that Ishua was banished from the party. Ishua, the mana porter, was caught off guard by the sudden decision and struggled to accept it, knowing that without him, the party's mana would quickly run dry. However, Alan dismissed his concern and insisted that the party had never lacked mana. Ishua tried to explain, but before he could finish, Alan rejected his claim and accused him of lying, believing that Ishua could not possibly possess such ability. Alan also held resentment, seeing Ishua as useless while noticing the attention Ishua received from the women in the party, something he disliked. He made it clear that this decision was not his alone but a collective choice made by the entire party. Ishua found it hard to believe. In the end, Alan drove him away, reducing him to nothing more than a mere mana porter before leaving him behind. While Ishua walked on, he struggled to accept what had happened. He had never expected to be cast out of the party. As a mana porter, his role was to supply mana to members whose abilities consumed large amounts of it. It was a magic-related position that worked entirely behind the scenes, unable to use magic directly. Because of that, people like Alan looked down on it and treated it as a useless role. Yet the party itself consisted of roles such as the hero, saint, sage, and magic swordswoman, all of which consumed significant amounts of mana. Ishua understood that continuing to fight while conserving mana would not be easy for them from now on, and despite everything, he still felt concerned for their situation. Still, he accepted that if it had truly been everyone's decision, then there was nothing he could do about it. As he continued walking, he suddenly heard someone calling out to him as a senior from a distance. When he turned to look, he was caught off guard. The saint from his former party rushed toward him and immediately embraced him. Ishua became aware of the faint, sweet scent around him and instinctively tried to stop her. Arya, the saint, looked up at him and questioned why he had abandoned them. She was a member of the same hero party and also his junior from their time at the Royal Adventurers Academy. Ishua was taken aback by her words and clarified that it had been a unanimous decision by the party to remove him. Arya found it hard to accept, especially knowing how much the party relied on his mana. Ishua could only repeat that it was what Alan had claimed. Arya struggled to understand such reasoning, and her frustration surfaced as a dark aura began to form around her due to her rising anger. Ishua pointed out that the dark aura surrounding Arya did not suit someone of her role as a saint. At the same time, he felt a sense of relief, realizing that Arya understood what had happened. Arya revealed that she had originally come to bring him back, but she had already made her decision. She chose to follow her senior instead. Ishua reminded her that she had worked hard to earn her place in the hero's party. However, Arya stood firm, unwilling to remain with a hero who had cast out her senior. She reflected on how Ishua had supported her since their time as students and acknowledged that she had become who she was because of him. With that resolve, she reached out her hand, asking to be taken along. Ishua looked at her, then returned the gesture with a small smile as he accepted her hand. Afterward, he became curious about how she had managed to find him. Arya admitted that she had a strand of his hair and used search magic to track him. Ishua was surprised by this and reacted to it as something close to sorcery, questioning what she was doing as a saint. Later, as they walked together, Arya wondered what their next step would be. Ishua decided that they should head to a nearby town for the time being and prepare for their journey. Not long after, a cry for help reached them. Turning toward the sound, they saw a carriage surrounded by a pack of monster wolves, while the guards struggled to hold them back. Without hesitation, Ishua moved to assist and urged Arya to join him. Arya responded with eagerness, clearly expecting this from him. The coachman, startled by their arrival, questioned their presence. Ishua focused on supplying mana and releasing it all at once. Arya, watching him, showed clear anticipation as they prepared to combine their efforts. Ishua assessed the situation, recognizing the monsters as B-rank creatures. While they posed a serious threat to beginner adventurers, they were still manageable for someone like Arya, who was known as a talented saint. Arya raised her staff, forming a magic circle above them as the confrontation began. Ishua was taken aback as he immediately recognized the technique as a top-level form of magic. Arya, however, cancelled the chant with ease and proceeded to apply multiple enchantments at once. Ishua grew concerned, noting that her enthusiasm was going too far and that even overwhelming force had its limits. He quickly formed a magic circle on the ground and began adjusting the quality of the magic power. He deliberately poured in mana with an attribute meant to repel the magic circle, intending to reduce its output. Believing this would lessen the impact, he called out to Arya. However, Arya remained fully focused and continued without hesitation, initiating a double chant. As she released the spell known as Innocent Shine, a massive surge of holy magic burst from her staff. Its intensity was overwhelming, forming a radiant holy cross high in the sky. Ishua, the coachman, and even the monsters were left stunned by the display. The pack of monster wolves was erased instantly, and even skeletons deep within the distant forest were wiped out. A vast wave of holy energy spread across the area, filling it with blinding light. After the display, Arya looked pleased and sought Ishua's reaction to her new magic. Ishua pointed out that she had gone too far, as the spell had purified everything around them and transformed the area into something like a sacred ground. Arya reacted lightly, but Ishua reminded her not to take it so casually. The coachman, still in shock, questioned their identities. Later, in a nearby village, inside a tavern, Ishua expressed his gratitude to the man for guiding them there. The man dismissed the thanks, explaining that he had brought them to the village as a way of showing his appreciation instead. He admitted that it was his first time witnessing such powerful magic, especially one activated through the transfer of magical power. Arya acknowledged that such a feat would normally be impossible. However, she attributed it to her senior's ability to achieve what others could not. She recognized that she would not have been able to cast a spell of that scale on her own. In her view, Ishua possessed an endless supply of mana and the ability to instantly grasp high-level magic upon seeing it for the first time. Arya spoke with excitement, expressing that Ishua, her senior, was truly beyond ordinary, as he adjusted and optimized the power with precision. At that moment, a waitress placed a bowl on their table. The man quickly noticed and reacted, pointing out that such unrefined hue nuts should not be served to those who had saved his life. The waitress apologized and explained that the village had been suffering from a shortage of mana, leaving them with no better option. Ishua became curious about the situation and asked about the mana shortage. The man explained that their location was only a small village, making it difficult to sustain proper operations. They could not even maintain their refinery, let alone their farming equipment. Their specialty originally came from hue nuts processed through a refiner, but with the lack of maintenance, production had declined. As a result, they could not afford the costs needed to repair their equipment, leaving them trapped in a worsening cycle. The man lowered his head, admitting that in the near future, the village itself might not survive. Ishua and Arya exchanged a glance. Ishua then stood up, understanding the situation, and decided to take action. If the problem was a lack of mana, he intended to handle it himself. The man was surprised and tried to refuse, explaining that he had only invited them to express his gratitude and did not wish to trouble them further. Despite this, Ishua stepped outside. Arya reassured the man, describing Ishua as someone with a naturally kind disposition. Later, they entered a building that housed the tanks and machinery. The man showed them the condition of the equipment, admitting that it had fallen into a terrible state and that he had been deceiving himself about it for years. Ishua observed the machines and felt that this level of repair was still within his capability. He placed his hands on the equipment and activated a skill known as full charge. The machines immediately began to glow with magic and resumed operation. Channeling mana into non-living objects was something Ishua was already accustomed to, as he had been responsible for maintaining the magical equipment of the hero's party. By applying mana with properties that repelled dirt, he not only restored the machines but also repaired the entire warehouse. The man and the villagers watched in amazement as the changes took place. Even the rust had fallen away from the equipment. One elderly man pointed out that a certain machine still had a faulty power source, but Ishua assessed it and concluded that with proper mana preparation, it could still be put to use. He had also repaired the damaged magic circle, ensuring that it would continue to function for some time. Ishua gave a modest smile, feeling that the work he had done was still rough and unpolished. One of the villagers reacted with surprise at that remark, unable to accept such a description. From their perspective, Ishua had poured an immense amount of mana into the equipment on his own and even restored magic formulas that had already deteriorated. To them, the scale of his work was comparable to that of several top engineers combined. The man grew even more astonished and once again questioned what Ishua truly was. Ishua simply introduced himself by name and identified himself as nothing more than a mana porter. The man found that hard to believe, recalling the spell that Arya had used earlier. He also turned his attention to Arya, recognizing that she must be someone of great standing. Arya formally presented herself as a saint acknowledged by the church. Ishua noticed her composed expression, one that reflected the effort she had put in over time. The girl who had once been shy around others had grown into someone worthy of her title. He remembered how she had practiced to reach this point during their student days. The man was left in disbelief upon learning that she was a saint. From his perspective, the fact that Ishua was traveling alongside her led him to assume that Ishua himself might be the hero. The man quickly took hold of Ishua's hands, overwhelmed by his assumption, and treated him with deep respect. He regarded the pairing of a hero and a saint as something perfectly fitting. Ishua turned toward Arya, recognizing that a misunderstanding had formed and expecting her to correct it as well. However, Arya instead seemed to accept the idea, seeing the two of them as a natural match. Ishua noticed her behavior shift in an unexpected way, as she appeared clumsy in that moment. Meanwhile, the villagers began to celebrate, convinced that the hero had saved their village. The man eagerly called for a feast, ordering their best alcohol to be brought out in honor of the hero. Ishua could only look at them, aware that they had completely misunderstood the situation. The man looked at Ishua and acknowledged that he did not know his circumstances, so if Ishua claimed otherwise, then it must truly be different. Another woman added that she had seen many impostors pretending to be heroes, but a true hero would always remain humble. Ishua realized that there was no point in trying to correct them, as the people of the village were not willing to listen. Later, Arya affirmed the idea and suddenly leapt toward Ishua, embracing him while declaring that her senior was her hero. Ishua was caught off guard and tried to make her stop, confused by her actions. As she held on to him, he became aware of something pressing against him that made him uneasy. Arya, however, dismissed it casually and showed no concern. Ishua looked at her more closely, sensing that something was off, and soon noticed that she had been drinking alcohol. He quickly warned the man that Arya could not handle alcohol and should not be made to drink. However, the man was already intoxicated and brushed it off, treating the situation lightly while continuing to address Ishua as a hero. Ishua repeatedly tried to deny the misunderstanding, but his words went ignored. At that moment, Arya leaned in closer, her expression shifting in a way that caused Ishua to panic. Before he could react properly, the man handed him another mug of alcohol, insisting that a hero should drink as well. At the same time, far from the village, the actual hero stood before a cave. Mythia, the magic swordswoman, hesitated and questioned whether it was truly wise to challenge an A-rank dungeon without Ishua. Riduru, the great sage, added that proceeding without both Ishua and Arya would be reckless. Alan grew irritated, thinking about how he had gone through the effort of banishing Ishua, yet the others still kept bringing him up. He dismissed their concerns and insisted that there would be no problem even without someone he considered incompetent. He urged them to stop talking and simply follow him. Mythia and Riduru exchanged looks before moving after him. Alan stepped into the cave, and they followed behind. Thus began the story of a fallen hero and a mana porter who would one day be recognized as a hero. At the entrance of Axis village, the people gathered and cheered as Ishua and Arya prepared to leave. The villagers warmly asked them to return and visit again someday. Ishua, the mana porter, gave a small laugh, still insisting that he was not a hero. Arya, the saint, simply smiled and viewed things differently, seeing him as the one who had saved the village in the eyes of its people. She then turned her attention to their next destination. Ishua decided that he would return his hero party license and register as an adventurer in the newcomer town of Norbish. Around that same time, deep inside a cave, the hero's party was engaged in battle against monsters. Alan, the hero, questioned his companion's concerns about the A-rank dungeon, believing it to be manageable even without a mana porter and a saint. Across the world, dungeons were classified by the Adventurers Guild from E to SS rank. While beginners could handle E-rank dungeons, even experienced adventurers risked being wiped out in those ranked A. Mythia, the magic swordswoman, remained cautious and considered the mana needed for their return, noting the absence of Ishua. Riduru, the great sage, also pointed out that without Arya, they could not afford to take injuries. Alan grew irritated, unable to understand their constant concern over Ishua and Arya. He dismissed their worries, believing that only cowards would hesitate before an A-rank dungeon and that mana shortages were not something to worry about. Mythia recalled how Ishua had always managed their mana so well that they never even noticed its consumption. She remembered his view that the ideal mana porter was someone who ensured the party never became aware of their mana usage. In that moment, a monster wolf suddenly lunged at her, forcing her to react instantly as she dodged the attack and struck it down. The battle continued deep inside the dungeon. Alan stepped over the head of a defeated monster wolf, convinced that their party was overwhelmingly strong and had nothing to fear. However, a strange shift soon occurred. Alan grew confused and turned his attention to Mythia, noticing something was off with her magic sword. Mythia understood the issue clearly. Without Ishua, she could no longer maintain the use of such a weapon, and her mana was already nearing its limit. Alan reacted harshly, questioning her worth as a member of the hero's party, then decided to act on his own. He attempted to summon his holy sword, calling it forth as he had done many times before. But suddenly he froze. A sharp pain struck him, and he felt as if his head was being crushed from within. The sensation overwhelmed him as the strain intensified. Mithia recognized the cause immediately. His mana was running low. Alan struggled to process it, as this had never happened to him before. Compared to ordinary people, he possessed a large reserve of mana, and under normal circumstances, he would not need to worry about depletion. However, the hero's skill, the Holy Sword, consumed an enormous amount of mana. He had always been meant to face mana shortages after becoming a hero, but because he had quickly formed a party with Ishua under the king's command, he had advanced this far without ever experiencing it. Mithia checked if he could still stand, but before he could respond, Alan's attention was drawn to a new threat. A lizard man stood before them, an A-rank monster. Until now, such enemies had fallen easily before him, but this time felt different. The creature no longer saw them as a threat but as prey. Alan's composure broke, and he retreated, urgently calling for Riduru to follow and protect him. However, Riduru hesitated, aware that Mithia was still engaged in battle. Alan insisted on withdrawing, convinced that if they stayed, they would all be wiped out. In his mind, the survival of the hero took priority over the life of a single magic swordswoman. Riduru was left stunned by those words. Riduru suddenly came to a stop, causing Alan to question her actions. However, she stood firm, unwilling to abandon a companion who was still fighting for her life. In that moment, she no longer acknowledged him as someone worthy of being called a hero. With her mana already depleted, she could only rely on what remained within her capability. Without hesitation, Riduru charged forward and struck the lizard man directly with her staff, using physical force to support Mithia. Alan was stunned by the sight of a sage resorting to close combat. Taking advantage of the opening, Mithia moved swiftly and cleanly severed the creature's head. She recognized that Ishua's guidance, learning how to fight without relying on mana, had proven to be invaluable. Just then, a loud scream echoed through the area. It came from Alan, who had encountered another lizard man up close. Reacting immediately, Mithia leapt onto the creature's back, restrained it, and drove her blade into it. Alan was left in shock at how quickly she acted. Mithia made it clear through her actions that they would not abandon their allies the way he had. Both Mithia and Riduru steadied themselves, prepared to continue fighting, holding on to the determination to endure until the end and make it out together. Later, outside the dungeon, Mithia reflected that they had somehow managed to escape. Riduru, exhausted, acknowledged the strain of the battle. Mithia noted that it had been a long time since she had fought using only her sword, realizing that she had grown too dependent on her magic blade and had neglected her basic swordsmanship. Even so, Riduru remarked that her skill still showed, as expected from someone trained as a swordswoman. At that moment, Alan questioned their attitude, unable to understand why they seemed at ease after what had happened. In his view, they had retreated without conquering the dungeon. He pointed out that the sage had been forced to fight with physical strikes, while the magic swordswoman had relied only on a dagger. To him, this was not how a hero's party should fight. He insisted that he had been the one who defeated most of the enemies along the way and concluded that their failure was due to Riduru and Mithia. Both women were left stunned by his words. Mithia pointed out that Alan had been the first to run out of mana. However, Alan dismissed it as nothing more than poorly timed discomfort. Mithia pressed further, suggesting that if that were true, he should be able to use the Holy Sword again at that very moment. Riduru stepped in and stopped her, recognizing that there was no point in continuing an argument with him. Mithia looked at Alan and then agreed with Riduru's judgment. Alan noticed the way both of them were looking at him and became unsettled by their expressions. With the situation going nowhere, Mithia shifted focus, noting that it was already getting dark and suggesting that they rest in a nearby village. Alan remained bothered, unable to understand the meaning behind the looks he had just received. Later, they arrived at Axis Village, where an elderly woman welcomed them and introduced Hugh nuts as a local specialty. Alan identified himself as the hero and explained that they had been struggling to clear a dungeon, asking for an inn. The elderly woman reacted with surprise, mentioning that there had already been another hero. Alan grew confused at the mention. She spoke of Ishua with admiration, describing him as a humble and admirable person, and also mentioned Saint Arya in a positive light. Alan was taken aback upon hearing that they had passed through the village and questioned how someone he considered a failure could be seen as a hero. The elderly woman reacted strongly, interpreting his words as an insult toward the village's hero. Alan raised his voice and insisted that Ishua was nothing more than a deceitful fraud, claiming that he had personally banished him for making false claims about supplying mana. Riduru and Mithia were shocked to hear that Ishua had been cast out. Sensing their reaction, Alan tried to adjust his claim, suggesting that Ishua had left on his own, but he quickly brushed past it and focused on his demands. He ordered the villagers to take him to the best inn and provide recovery and mana potions. The elderly woman then questioned whether he intended to pay. Alan reacted as if such a thing should not be expected, treating it as a privilege of the hero to receive goods from the town without cost. He believed it was only natural for the villagers to cooperate. The villagers were left speechless, and even Mithia and Riduru were taken aback. Mithia looked at Alan, unable to understand what he was saying. She pointed out that such privileges only applied under special circumstances. Riduru immediately sensed that the situation was turning bad. The villagers began to surround them, gripping farm tools as weapons. The elderly woman, holding an empty pot, confronted Alan, convinced that he had finally revealed his true nature. From the beginning, she had felt something was off. She accused him of being a false hero who took money and valuables from others. Alan rejected the accusation and insisted that Ishua was the real fraud. However, the elderly woman contrasted his behavior, recalling how Ishua had not even accepted their gratitude and had acted in a completely different manner. Alan tried to insist that he was genuine, but before he could finish, an egg struck him. Soon after, the villagers began throwing objects at them, driving them out while refusing to tolerate any insults toward Ishua. Mithia realized that staying any longer was impossible under those conditions. Alan glared at the villagers, telling himself to remember this as they withdrew. Later, as they moved through the forest, Mithia questioned him about what had truly happened regarding Ishua's banishment. She wondered if he had lied to them. Alan dismissed her concerns and insisted that he had simply removed someone he considered unworthy of the hero's party. Mithia struggled to accept this, recalling how Ishua had always treated them with kindness. She resolved that they should return and make amends, recognizing that clearing a ranked dungeon without Ishua would be impossible. Alan refused to listen, claiming that they were only holding him back and had no right to question his decisions. Frustration showed in his expression as he looked at them and implied that they could be removed as well. Mithia and Riduru remained silent, only watching him. Alan questioned whether that outcome would even matter. Mithia reflected that he often spoke that way and admitted that without Ishua, she no longer felt any attachment to the party. Riduru reached the same conclusion, recognizing that following him any further would only lead them toward danger, as he no longer carried himself as someone worthy of being called a hero. Alan came to realize just how bad the situation had become. If both members were to leave now, it would put him in serious trouble. He let out a small, uneasy laugh while reminding himself that they owed him for allowing them to join the hero's party in the first place. He then pushed them to gather mana potions by any means necessary, intending to head back into the A-rank dungeon afterward. In response, the two women threw something toward him. It was the hero party license, which they had decided to return. Alan resisted the timing of it, insisting that it should not happen yet, at least not until he could find new members. He held onto his pride, reminding himself that he was recognized across the continent as its hero. Mithia and Riduru, however, showed no hesitation. They acknowledged his claims in a detached manner and expressed that they would simply look forward to whatever he accomplished next. With that, both of them turned away and left, leaving Alan alone in the forest. As Mithia and Riduru walked together, Mithia wondered what they should do moving forward. Riduru considered that if they had not been abandoned, they could have continued working alongside Ishua. She then mentioned that she possessed a detection skill and, by chance, still had a strand of Ishua's hair. Mithia responded in a similar way, noting that she also had a detection ability and, coincidentally, carried a strand of his hair as well. The two exchanged glances, each insisting that it was merely coincidence. Using their detection skills, they traced Ishua's destination and discovered that he was heading toward the newcomer's town, Nabish. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, Alan sat on the ground, struggling to accept what had happened. He reminded himself that he was the hero, yet could not understand how things had turned out this way. Then a thought came to him. He considered bringing Ishua back, assuming that after being expelled, Ishua would be in a difficult situation and would gratefully return if given the chance. With that idea in mind, Alan activated his party discovery skill, a unique ability that allowed him to locate holders of his party license. The result pointed him toward the same destination, the newcomer's town of Nabish. At that same time, Ishua and Arya finally arrived at the newcomer's town, Nabish. Inside the Adventurers Guild, Arya held a crystal ball used to measure status. As it responded, the crystal began to glow, revealing her attributes. The receptionist observed the results, noting that her strength ranked at C, attack at B, defense at B, while both her mana and intelligence reached S rank. The receptionist showed clear approval, recognizing that such results were fitting for a saint who had once been part of the hero's party, highlighting her exceptional intelligence and magical ability. Arya then turned her attention to Ishua, calling him her senior and indicating that it was now his turn. This took place in the Adventurers Guild of Nabish, where both Arya and Ishua had already given up their positions in the hero's party and were now registering as new adventurers. The crystal used for evaluation categorized abilities from F to S rank, with F representing average levels and anything above a considered highly respected. Ishua placed his hand on the crystal, and immediately, a surge of energy burst forth from it. The sudden reaction caused everyone present to be startled. The receptionist, confused, questioned how someone in the role of a mana porter could produce such a result. Upon checking his status, she was taken aback by what she saw. Ishua's mana capacity had reached SSS rank. The surrounding adventurers were unable to hide their disbelief, as some had never even heard of a triple S rank before. The receptionist briefly considered whether the device was malfunctioning and thought about using another one to confirm the reading. However, Arya remained confident in the result, knowing from experience that Ishua had never once run out of mana. Her certainty only deepened the shock among those present. A mana porter possessing SSS-level mana was beyond anything they had imagined. Some began to wonder if it meant that his magic power was effectively limitless, allowing him to use abilities without restriction. In the end, the receptionist came to a decision. Despite Arya's recognized brilliance and Ishua's overwhelming mana capacity, both of them were assigned an adventurer rank of C. The receptionist informed them that both of them had been assigned the rank of C as adventurers. The surrounding adventurers were left in disbelief, unable to accept that someone could begin at C rank immediately after registering. Some questioned whether it was even possible to start at any rank other than F or E. Ishua made it clear that they did not wish to receive any special treatment. However, the reaction from the adventurers shifted quickly, as many of them began inviting the two to join their parties, promising favorable treatment. Ishua was caught off guard by the sudden attention and looked toward Arya, noticing that she was trembling. He realized the situation was not good, as Arya, who was naturally shy, seemed unable to maintain her composed presence as a saint. Trying to manage the situation, Ishua asked the others to give them space, emphasizing that aside from Arya's role as a saint, he himself was only a mana porter and did not hold much value. At that moment, a voice called out, drawing everyone's attention. A female knight stepped forward, pointing out that it would be troublesome if everyone crowded around Ishua at once. The adventurers immediately recognized her and addressed her with familiarity. She introduced herself as Diana, holding the position of a sword saint. Ishua was surprised upon hearing that title. An older adventurer then informed him that she was an S-rank adventurer and a member of the hero Lilian's party, known for defeating Ifrit, one of the 4 heavenly kings serving directly under the demon lord. Diana apologized on behalf of the guild members for the commotion. Just then, a group of people rushed into the area. Afterward, she stepped closer to Ishua and placed a hand on his shoulder, asking if he would consider joining their party. The surrounding adventurers were stunned by this development, realizing that the sword saint herself had stepped in to recruit him. Ishua politely declined, explaining that he and Arya intended to continue working together on their own for the time being. Diana responded by highlighting that their leader possessed the qualities of a hero and that Ishua's abilities would surely be valuable to them. Arya then reflected on how Ishua had struggled under a hero who failed to understand his capabilities. In response, Diana assured her that their leader, Lilian, was not that kind of person. Arya further questioned whether a leader could be trusted if they would not even come to meet them personally. Diana hesitated for a moment, struggling with the circumstances behind it. Ishua stepped in with a calm expression, offering an apology on Arya's behalf, understanding that her words came from concern for him. He admitted that although it was his first time meeting Diana, he felt that she was someone he could trust. From his perspective, if Diana placed her trust in Lilian, then Lilian must also be a good person. Even so, having only recently been banished, Ishua decided that he wanted to continue working only with people he already knew for the time being. Diana accepted his reasoning and apologized for approaching him so suddenly. As she left, Diana reflected on how she would have to report her failure to Lilian, knowing that she had not succeeded in recruiting Ishua. Meanwhile, Ishua observed her demeanor and felt that she was sincere. Under different circumstances, he believed he might have accepted the offer. Considering that the leader of the party was the hero Lilian, he assumed she must be a remarkable person. Later, in the forest, Diana returned and informed Lilian of the outcome, apologizing for not completing the task. She found Lilian standing within a magic circle, surrounded by a floating teddy bear formed from magic. Diana recognized the intricate and refined structure of the spell, understanding that it reflected continuous training, even for someone without a magic-based role. Lilian raised her hand, causing the magic circle to lift before it disappeared instantly. As she opened her eyes, she accepted the situation, acknowledging that Ishua likely had his own reasons. Lilian was known as a genius who had obtained the role of hero from birth, and her reputation had only grown after cornering one of the 4 heavenly kings. Despite her status, Diana had always seen her continue to train diligently without arrogance. Even so, the burden of being a hero had taken away much of her time, leaving little room to enjoy her youth, and her emotions had gradually become restrained. Yet in that moment her composure broke. Tears began to fall as she struggled to understand why Ishua seemed to reject her. Diana could only stay by her side and offer comfort, gently conveying that Ishua had expressed a desire for a proper meeting in person. That was why Diana suggested that Lilian go in person. However, Lilian could not bring herself to do something she found too embarrassing. Thoughts of her first love lingered, and even Diana found it hard to believe how simply learning that they were in the same town had affected her so deeply. Diana decided to shift the approach and suggested that, for now, they should plan a way to join Ishua's quest indirectly. She proposed assisting them when they found themselves in difficult situations. Lilian immediately brightened at the idea and accepted it without hesitation. Diana observed her reaction and noticed how she now resembled an ordinary girl of her age. She reflected that Lilian had reached the stage where falling in love was natural, and she quietly hoped that this encounter would turn into something meaningful for her. The next morning at the Adventurers Guild, Ishua urged Arya to move forward, marking the beginning of their new life as adventurers. Inside the guild, the atmosphere was lively, with many adventurers gathering around the request board, trying to secure jobs as quickly as possible. The crowd made it difficult to move, and Ishua noted how congested the area had become. Amid the activity, Arya noticed several requests placed on a nearby table and brought them to Ishua's attention. As he examined them, the receptionist approached and encouraged them to begin their work right away. Ishua agreed and picked up the requests from the table, which caught the receptionist by surprise. Looking through the details, Ishua found tasks such as defeating hordes of undead, purifying a rusted power reactor, and searching for a missing cat from a nearby street. The request involving the cat immediately drew Arya's interest, and her expression brightened at the thought. Seeing this, Ishua considered it suitable as well. He then informed the receptionist that they would take all of the listed requests. The receptionist questioned whether they were truly fine with taking those requests. Ishua remained certain, as those were the kinds of tasks they preferred. The receptionist acknowledged his choice, finding it fitting of him. However, she found it surprising that he would willingly accept requests that others considered not worthwhile. Ishua did not immediately understand what she meant by that and felt confused by the remark, prompting him to seek clarification on why those requests were seen as not good enough. The receptionist explained that those were tasks left behind because the rewards did not match the effort or difficulty required. She admitted that she never expected anyone to accept them. Ishua, however, saw no issue, especially since one of the requests involved finding a cat. Later, at a nearby park, Ishua raised his hands and cast a spell that attracted cats from the surrounding area. One by one, they gathered around them. Arya was delighted by the sight of so many small animals. Ishua explained that the spell worked by emitting a certain wavelength that appealed to cats, making it a task particularly suited for someone in his role. Arya, while holding one of the cats, recognized that this was something only he could manage. Ishua then identified the specific cat from the request, allowing them to complete the task successfully. From a distance, Lilian and Diana observed their actions. Lilian wondered how long it would normally take to find a missing cat. Diana reflected that such a task was not dependent on magic or sword skill and could take an entire day or even longer. Yet, they had resolved it in a short amount of time. Soon after, Arya unleashed a powerful holy spell, eliminating a large group of undead with ease, while Ishua continuously supplied her with mana. Their coordination allowed them to handle the situation smoothly, and their movements reflected how naturally they worked together. Lilian, watching from afar, was surprised by the scale of Arya's attack, capable of defeating a large number of undead in a single strike. Diana recognized that such enemies typically required magic to defeat and would usually demand a significant number of mana potions. She was left wondering whether Ishua had truly generated that amount of mana on his own. Lilian became certain that they would need their help in the future. Meanwhile, Ishua and Arya continued completing their tasks, eventually finishing the filtration of multiple power reactors. Ishua questioned whether it was acceptable to receive payment for something that felt so simple to him. Lilian and Diana, still observing, found it difficult to comprehend the extent of his abilities. At that moment, a group of men approached aggressively, accusing Ishua of interfering with the task of filtering the reactors. The owner quickly explained that these individuals were from a rival company that had been threatening the maintenance operations, preventing proper work from being done. As tensions rose, the opposing group moved to attack Ishua. Lilian immediately recognized the situation and felt that it was their moment to step in and assist Ishua. Diana agreed with her judgment. Meanwhile, Ishua calmly instructed the owner to take cover. As he observed the approaching group, he considered his options. There were too many opponents to handle one by one, and since they were humans, the presence of power reactors around them made large-scale attacks impractical. Arya's wide-range offensive spells could not be used safely in this environment. With that in mind, Ishua made a decision. A faint smile appeared as he raised his arms, and in the next moment, the advancing men suddenly halted. Confusion spread among them as they tried to understand what had just happened. Ishua had activated a technique known as a mana ring field, a method that increased the concentration of mana in the surrounding area to enhance recovery. However, for those unaccustomed to it, the effect caused severe discomfort, bringing on headaches and nausea, especially for individuals without magic-related roles. One of the men struggled but remained standing, showing resistance despite the effects. Ishua took note of this, realizing that the man was not an ordinary thug and was likely an adventurer hired for the task. Considering how to stop him without causing harm, Ishua chose another method. Ishua then directed a mana overflow straight into the man. As the surge of mana entered his body, the man immediately began to feel unwell, his condition worsening in an instant. From a distance, Diana was taken aback by what she had just witnessed, trying to understand what Ishua had done. Lilian quickly recognized the technique, realizing that Ishua had forcefully injected mana into the man, identifying it as mana overflow. The effect intensified into severe magical intoxication, and the man soon lost consciousness. Diana remained deeply impressed by Ishua's ability. It was hard for her to believe that a method meant to increase mana concentration for recovery could be turned into an offensive technique. In that moment, she fully understood that Ishua's SSS-level magical power was far from ordinary and was not just for show. Lilian, holding onto her teddy bear, remained focused on the thought that they would eventually have an opportunity to help him. Diana, however, quietly considered that at this rate, such a moment might never come. At that same time, Alan arrived at the town of Nabish, recognizing it as the destination he had been searching for. Meanwhile, Ishua and Arya made their way back, arriving at the guild. Ishua greeted those present, maintaining his usual calm demeanor. Among the adventurers, whispers began to spread as some recognized him as the one with SSS rank mana capacity, known for continuously accepting requests others avoided due to poor rewards. Ishua and Arya approached the guild staff, who welcomed them with a smile, noting how quickly he had gained attention in just a few days. Ishua remained modest, believing that people were simply misunderstanding him, as he only chose tasks that suited his abilities. Suddenly, a loud voice called out from the entrance, announcing Ishua's presence. Startled, both Ishua and Arya turned toward the source. Ishua was surprised to see Alan standing there alone and immediately noticed the absence of his former companions. Alan carried an unsettling expression as he revealed that he had already cast aside both the sage and the magic swordswoman. Ishua was visibly shaken by that claim, unable to comprehend how such capable individuals had been dismissed. Alan, still maintaining a confident attitude, presented what he considered good news, offering to take Ishua and Arya back into the hero's party. The sudden proposal left both of them unable to respond, caught off guard by the situation. Alan pressed Ishua, expecting a more positive reaction, convinced that returning to the hero's party should have been something worth celebrating. However, Ishua gave no response. Alan grew confused by the silence, unable to understand why Ishua was not reacting the way he had anticipated. He had fully expected Ishua to accept the offer without hesitation, yet that expectation was not met. He began to grow irritated when the surrounding adventurers reacted differently than he expected. Laughter spread among the crowd, drawing his attention. One of the men nearby pointed out that they had already heard about the so-called hero who had driven Ishua away. Alan reacted sharply to that statement, unable to accept being described in such a way. Another adventurer then clarified that Ishua and Arya were no longer low-ranked adventurers, revealing that both of them had already reached C rank. This only added to Alan's confusion, as he had believed newcomers could only start from the lowest ranks. The atmosphere shifted as more voices rose around him, the crowd openly reacting to his presence. Some pointed out how far beyond normal Ishua was, while others remarked that his removal from the party had only brought in an exceptional newcomer. There were also those who noted that Alan was now struggling due to a lack of mana, suggesting that his current offer was made out of convenience rather than sincerity. Alan stood with his back turned to the laughing crowd, visibly agitated by their reactions. He could not accept being ridiculed by them. At that moment, Ishua addressed him calmly, making it clear that the others he had cast aside were doing well and had no intention of returning to his party. With their backs facing each other, Ishua shifted his attention to Arya, focusing on their next task and suggesting that if there were no other requests, the current one would be enough. Meanwhile, Alan remained frozen, struggling to process what had just happened. The realization that his offer had been rejected weighed heavily on him, especially after being mocked by those around him. Frustration built within him as he slowly reached for his sword, unwilling to accept the situation. Just as he was about to draw it, a sharp voice cut through the tension, stopping him. Both Ishua and Arya were startled by the sudden interruption. Diana had stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention. She made it clear that fighting within the guild was strictly prohibited and that if he intended to draw his weapon, she would stand as his opponent. At the same time, her stance conveyed a deeper challenge, questioning whether he truly possessed the resolve to follow through. Alan froze under the pressure, overwhelmed by the intensity of her presence. A deep sense of fear took hold of him, something he could not ignore. In that moment, he realized the gap between them. Unable to withstand it, he stepped back, choosing to withdraw from the situation for the time being. As he turned to leave, Ishua called out to him. Diana, observing his reaction, understood that he had not even been capable of recognizing the difference in their abilities until that overwhelming pressure had been directed at him so clearly. Ishua expressed his gratitude toward Diana, while Arya reacted playfully as Alan turned away to leave. Diana gave a faint smile, reflecting that she had never held a good impression of heroes, and after witnessing everything she finally understood why. Knowing Alan's name now, she simply hoped that he would not cause trouble again in the future. After that incident, Ishua and Arya continued working steadily, taking on one abandoned request after another. About a week later, both of them reacted with surprise as they examined a new request. Ishua carefully read the contents written on the paper. The task was to travel to the elf village and report any unusual findings back to the guild, with a reward of 30 gold coins. As he considered it, something did not sit right with him. These types of requests were usually ignored because the rewards were too low compared to the effort required. Yet this one offered a large payment. If even experienced adventurers avoided it, there had to be a reason. It was also unusual that the client's name was not listed. Ishua grew cautious, unwilling to involve Arya in something that seemed suspicious. The guild staff noticed his hesitation and questioned whether he intended to decline. From their perspective, the task appeared simple, requiring only a visit to the elf village and a report afterward. Ishua found that explanation strange, realizing that if it were truly that simple, someone would have already accepted it. The staff hesitated before finally revealing the truth. The request had actually been prepared by the guild specifically for Ishua. Both he and Arya were taken aback by this revelation. The guild staff began explaining that, since Ishua had been consistently taking on abandoned requests, there had been discussion about offering him a special reward. However, before she could finish, Ishua immediately objected, feeling that such treatment was excessive given that he had only been working there for a little over a week. The guild staff, already anticipating his reaction, explained that they knew he would refuse such an offer. Because of that, they chose a different approach, preparing a request with a high reward while disguising it as one of the usual overlooked tasks. The staff urged him to accept it, presenting it as nothing more than a casual trip rather than a demanding quest. Ishua remained uncertain, lightly waving off the idea at first. Meanwhile, Arya's thoughts shifted in a different direction. The idea of traveling together without pressure began to appeal to her, and she became visibly excited by the thought of a peaceful outing. She encouraged the idea, seeing it as a chance for them to take a break. Ishua was caught off guard by her reaction, and upon reflecting, he realized that he had been so focused on completing requests that he had unintentionally drawn Arya into the same routine without rest. With a gentle smile, Ishua came to accept the idea, realizing that taking a break was necessary. He decided to take on the request, acknowledging that they needed time to rest. Arya and the guild staff were clearly pleased by his decision, their reactions filled with relief and excitement. Nearby, Diana remained seated calmly while Lilian stayed hidden, quietly listening. Upon hearing the conversation, Lilian realized their next destination would be the elf village and drew Diana's attention to it. She then decided that they would help Ishua and earn his trust, resolving to act on it that very day. Diana listened while reflecting on the past week, thinking that the two of them did not seem to be in any real danger. However, Lilian's attention had already shifted as she approached the guild staff, requesting jobs related to the area around the elf village. Diana realized that Lilian was no longer paying attention to her thoughts. The guild staff searched through the available requests and found only one suitable option at the moment, the subjugation of a mutated ogre king. Upon seeing it, the staff reacted with surprise, recognizing it as an A-rank request and one of the most difficult tasks currently assigned by the guild. Lilian showed interest in the request, and Diana considered it manageable for them. Lilian appeared confident, believing it would not pose much of a challenge. The guild staff agreed, trusting in their ability to handle such a task. Lilian's enthusiasm grew as she committed to taking on the request. Diana, observing her, thought that constantly following Ishua and Arya would not lead to much, but she still hoped that something would develop from this situation. Meanwhile, the guild staff remained satisfied with how things had unfolded. 3 days later, Ishua and Arya were traveling in a carriage. As they continued their journey, Arya gazed out the window and spotted something in the distance. The massive form of the world tree, Idrasil, had come into view. She was amazed that it could already be seen from so far away. Ishua explained its significance, describing it as a legendary tree that had protected the elven village for 2,000 years. Its power purified miasma, a force that gave rise to monsters. According to legend, an angel had planted a miraculous seed in a land once ruled by monsters, and from it grew the great tree that cleansed the surrounding area. Over time, this allowed people to settle and live safely nearby. Arya reflected on the story, recalling that it was because of the world tree that humans were able to inhabit that land. Ishua responded with a light laugh, recognizing that Arya had always been fond of that tale. Arya smiled as she clenched her fist, clearly excited at the thought of seeing the world tree. However, Ishua felt a sense of unease as he reflected on it. From that distance, he could not grasp it clearly, yet something about the flow of mana surrounding the world tree felt unusual to him. Even so, he tried to convince himself that it might only be his imagination. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Diana was engaged in battle against a large group of monsters. Lilian, holding her stuffed toy, felt frustrated after losing track of Ishua. Diana acknowledged that it could not be helped, given the overwhelming number of enemies. Even though they were already near the base of the world tree and close to the main road, the sheer volume of monsters remained unusually high. As the fight dragged on, Diana began to feel the strain, her breathing growing heavier. The thick miasma in the area made it difficult to breathe, placing additional pressure on her body. Noticing this, Lilian raised her hand and used a healing ability. Gradually, Diana's condition improved. Although it provided relief, the effect was only temporary, as the purification of the miasma was limited. Diana considered the situation and wondered if the dense miasma was also the cause behind the monster's mutation. She decided that they needed to locate their target as soon as possible. At that moment, something appeared before them, causing both of them to react. Diana moved quickly, shielding Lilian as she identified the creature. The target of their A-rank quest had revealed itself, the mutated Ogre King variant. Diana drew her sword, ready to finish the mission now that the target had shown itself. However, as she moved in to attack, the Ogre King responded instantly, sending her flying back with overwhelming force. The impact left her stunned as she struggled to understand what had happened. She realized that her attacks had not worked as expected. The creature's condition was different from what they had anticipated. Lilian analyzed the situation, recognizing that in some cases, monsters exposed to excessive miasma could evolve into higher forms, a phenomenon known as promotion. Observing the Ogre King closely, she understood that it had absorbed a significant amount of miasma from its surroundings. The Ogre King stood there with a weird, unsettling smile. It had already undergone a transformation, rising to an S-rank existence. Diana recognized the situation and accepted that there was no other choice. She focused on creating an opening, deciding that drawing its attention, even for a brief moment, would be enough. Lilian responded immediately. She raised her hands, and a glowing orb formed above them. In the next instant, the orb expanded outward, shaping itself into a barrier-like structure that surrounded the area. This ability came from the power she was born with as a hero. In exchange for an immense amount of magical energy, she could transport both allies and enemies into a virtual world of her own creation, forming a controlled space where the battle would unfold under her conditions. Lilian successfully activated the inherent barrier, shaping it into her fantasy world. Within that space, they could fight under completely advantageous conditions, a power that truly reflected the level of a hero. She established the domain as an inviolable territory, a perfect space where everything followed her will and where her intentions could fully take form. With the battlefield set, she directed her focus toward Diana, signaling that it was now her turn. As Lilian's power flowed outward, her hands glowed, channeling that energy into Diana and amplifying her strength. Diana responded immediately, her intensity rising as her sword began to shine. The weapon transformed into the strongest blade Lilian could envision, a fantasy weapon capable of cutting through anything. Without hesitation, Diana leapt forward toward the Ogre King, carrying the clear intent to bring the battle to an end with a single strike. Lilian felt a sense of certainty as the attack landed, believing that the fight had been decided. Diana, too, showed a brief moment of relief. However, in the very next instant, everything shifted as Diana was suddenly blown away, the outcome far from what they had expected. The Ogre King let out a mocking laugh, unfazed by the attack. Diana reacted in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. Lilian, equally stunned, struggled to comprehend the situation, realizing that their combined technique, the same one that had once defeated one of the 4 heavenly kings, had been deflected. Diana quickly understood the implication. The Ogre King's resistance to magic had surpassed even the limits of Lilian's constructed domain. Lilian, still maintaining the space, felt her mana rapidly draining and recognized that time was running out. She urged Diana to finish the fight while the fantasy world could still be sustained. With no time to hesitate, Diana gripped her sword and charged forward again. She launched a series of rapid strikes, aiming to overwhelm the Ogre King. However, each blow was met with the creature's massive club, deflecting her attacks with ease. The disparity in strength became more apparent with every exchange. Diana pressed on, but frustration began to build as her efforts failed to break through. The Ogre King remained composed, its expression twisted with amusement as it blocked each strike without effort. Then, in a sudden counterattack, it brought down a powerful blow. The impact struck Diana directly, sending her backward. Blood spilled from her mouth as the force caused her grip to falter, her sword slipping from her hand and crashing onto the ground. Lilian reacted immediately, watching as Diana was overpowered by the overwhelming strength of the Ogre King. Suddenly, Lilian's attention shifted back to the monster, and she was caught off guard by what she saw. The Ogre King towered before her, closing in as it prepared to strike. Even so, she refused to accept the thought of falling in a place like this. She reminded herself that she still had to become a great hero and defeat the Demon King. As the Ogre King lifted its massive club, ready to bring it down, Lilian's thoughts turned to Ishua, realizing that she had not yet done anything for him. At that moment, she heard a familiar voice, one that did not belong within her domain. It was Ishua, reminding Arya to stay close to him, while Arya reacted with confusion toward the strange space around them. Lilian was left bewildered. This space was supposed to be her absolute territory, a perfect domain under her control. No one should have been able to enter or leave without her permission. Yet, right before her eyes, Ishua and Arya had stepped into her fantasy world. The sight left her stunned, unable to understand how they had managed to enter a space that should have been completely sealed. Back then, people had smiled at her. Voices surrounded her, praising her as a genius and urging others to invite her into their parties. Yet, behind those words, quieter whispers followed. Some questioned what it truly meant to be called a hero, noting that she had gained her power simply by being born with it. Others doubted her, thinking that someone so young could be easily influenced. She had walked past them, alone, distancing herself from those voices. As she ran through the courtyard, her steps faltered, and she tripped, falling to the ground. Her stuffed toy slipped from her hands. Tears welled up as she slowly reached for it, holding it close as she broke down. At that moment, someone approached her. It was Ishua. Now, in the present, the memory quickly faded as the Ogre King before Lilian raised its weapon, preparing to strike her down. In that critical moment, Ishua moved without hesitation, lunging forward and pulling Lilian away, saving her from the incoming attack. Once she was out of danger, Ishua checked on her condition. Lilian, still shaken, expressed her gratitude for his timely intervention. Ishua recognized her, recalling that they had once met near the castle. At the same time, Arya noticed Diana and was alarmed by her condition, drawing Ishua's attention as well. Seeing Diana injured left him confused about how things had escalated to this point. Lilian, still trying to understand the situation, could not comprehend how Ishua had managed to enter her sealed space. Ishua attempted to explain, his thoughts tracing back to earlier events. A few hours before, Arya had expressed her wish to see the world tree up close. However, they had been stopped at the entrance of the elf village, as access to the area was restricted and only authorized individuals were allowed to approach. Ishua had taken the situation lightly, accepting that they would not be able to enter, unaware that events would soon take an unexpected turn. Arya raised her voice in protest, recalling that the travel guide had mentioned open tours. The frustration built up inside her, and in the next moment, she snapped. She lifted her staff high and unleashed a series of powerful spells. Waves of holy magic burst forth as the surrounding undead scattered in panic. A radiant light erupted, surrounded by dark, drifting remnants, as her attacks continued one after another. Ishua watched her closely, sensing that something about the situation felt off. Even though she was defeating everything with ease, the enemies they encountered were consistently A rank or higher. It gave him the impression that they had stepped into a place far more dangerous than expected, almost like a demon realm. Arya paused briefly, realizing the level of the enemies she had just eliminated, while Ishua lightly acknowledged that she had already taken them down without difficulty. In his mind, he could not help but notice how much she had grown, to the point where her progress seemed unstoppable. Arya then pointed out that the miasma in the area had thickened to the extent that it was visible to the naked eye. Recognizing the danger, Ishua acted immediately. He spread his arms wide and activated a mana-linked field. The technique enhanced mana recovery, but more importantly, it purified the air within its range. As the field expanded, Ishua grew more certain that something was wrong with the elf village. The density of the miasma had reached a level where it should no longer be possible for people to live in the area. He realized that his earlier doubts might not have been unfounded. Looking ahead, he tried to observe the world tree, but his view was obstructed by the surrounding forest. Even so, the thought lingered that something might be affecting it. The request that had seemed questionable at first now felt as if it might have been grounded in reality. Suddenly, Ishua sensed something unusual and focused his attention in a specific direction. He pointed it out to Arya and urged her to follow. Though confused, she stayed close as they moved toward the source of the disturbance. When they arrived, both of them stopped in place, their expressions turning serious. What lay before them was not natural. The space itself appeared warped, as if it had been artificially altered. Ishua recognized it as a distortion of space, while Arya wondered if it was connected to the spread of the miasma. Ishua stepped forward cautiously and reached out, examining one of the patterns within the distortion. It resembled a complex interlocking magic formation, something deliberately constructed rather than occurring on its own. Ishua examined the structure before him and recognized it as an extremely complex magical configuration. Even so, he managed to analyze a portion of it. In the next moment, something shifted, and the formation opened. A brilliant light poured out, taking the shape of a wide, glowing eye. Without hesitation, Ishua stepped forward. As he moved inside, he made sure Arya stayed close behind him. Arya followed, still trying to understand the strange space unfolding before them. Nearby, Lilian watched in astonishment. She realized that Ishua had managed to analyze part of her fantasy world, something even she herself had not fully understood despite being able to use it. The realization left her deeply shaken, as his ability far exceeded what she had expected. Ishua paused, considering what he had just seen. It became clear to him that the space itself was tied directly to Lilian's skill. With that understanding, he concluded that it had no connection to the miasmas surrounding the area. Turning his attention toward Lilian, he recognized that someone capable of wielding such large-scale magic could only be a hero. At that moment, the Ogre King charged toward them. The sudden movement forced everyone into action as they moved to evade the attack. Ishua quickly identified the creature as a mutated Ogre King, one that had absorbed an enormous amount of miasma and grown far more powerful than expected. Reacting immediately, Ishua placed his hand on Lilian and activated a full charge. A surge of energy flowed through her, restoring her depleted mana in an instant. The sudden recovery allowed her to regain her strength. Ishua then turned his attention to Diana's condition. Arya was already by her side, using her magic to treat her injuries. A soft light surrounded them as the healing took effect. Gradually, Diana regained consciousness. As she opened her eyes, she realized that both Arya and Ishua were present, something she had not expected. At the same time, Arya noticed that Diana had inhaled a large amount of miasma and was unable to purify it on her own. Ishua stepped in without hesitation, taking responsibility for it. He activated his magic once more, cleansing the surrounding area as a burst of light spread outward, purifying the miasma and restoring the environment around them. Diana's eyes widened as she felt a sudden change in her body. The heaviness that had weighed her down was gone, replaced by a light and steady sensation. Ishua explained that miasma was a mixture of curses and mana, and that it could be neutralized by applying opposing mana to cancel it out. Diana turned toward him, realizing how advanced such a method was. Ishua remained calm, his expression relaxed as he reflected on his role. Since mana porters could not directly use magic, they focused on studying spell analysis and attribute combinations, developing ways to remain useful despite being seen as a lower-tier position. At that moment, flame struck the Ogre King's eye. Lilian had launched a fireball with her bare hand. Lilian unleashed another series of fireball attacks, but the Ogre King blocked them just in time. Everyone was left stunned in amazement. Lilian realized that no damage had been done. She turned toward Ishua, her emotions rising as she faced him. She felt a deep sense of happiness at being able to see him one last time. Ishua froze, caught in confusion. Lilian acknowledged that the enemy before them was far too formidable to defeat at that moment. Still, she carried a faint smile, resolved to at least buy him some time. She held on to that resolve as a matter of pride as a hero. Ishua remained standing there, speechless. He recognized that this was Lilian, a true hero. Even with the thought of sacrificing herself, she stayed firm. Though they both carried the title of hero, the difference between them was clear. As Ishua held Lilian's arm, he expressed that the opponent was certainly powerful, but not one that could not be defeated. Lilian fell silent, unable to grasp his meaning at first. Ishua then turned to Arya and gave a signal. Arya responded immediately, activating her abilities. A sudden burst of light wrapped around the group, and everyone was left in awe. Diana looked at her own hand, noticing the effect of the enhancement. Ishua declared that he would handle all the mana costs, allowing her to use her skills without limitation. As Arya stood calmly with her eyes closed, steadily channeling magic, Ishua made it clear that she would continue casting healing spells and buffs. He reminded everyone to remain cautious of instant death attacks. Lilian gasped as the realization settled in. They had become nearly invincible. Diana was taken aback by the situation, questioning whether such overwhelming mana consumption could truly be sustained. Ishua, however, showed no hesitation and pushed everyone forward, urging them to attack. Surrounded by a radiant, divine light, they advanced toward the Ogre King. Diana stepped in first, raising her sword and striking with full force. Her blade cut across the creature's stomach, drawing blood. The effect of the enhancements was clear, as her attack was now able to reach and damage the monster. At the same time, Arya released a powerful burst of holy energy, sending a wave of light crashing into the target. The intensity of her magic stood out, as it always did. Yet despite their combined efforts, the Ogre King remained standing, the damage reduced to only a shallow wound. The creature let out a low, unsettling laugh, showing no signs of faltering. Ishua observed the situation calmly, realizing that a promoted mutant stood on an entirely different level. Facing such an opponent required a different approach. He raised his hands once more, focusing his energy toward the Ogre King. Diana noticed his actions and could not immediately understand his intention. Lilian, however, recognized what was happening. Ishua was channeling mana infused with holy attributes directly into the creature. Ishua presented a simple question, considering how one would defeat an opponent that had been strengthened by absorbing miasma. To him, the answer was straightforward. Diana fell silent as the realization began to form, gradually understanding the approach. Ishua then revealed the method, explaining that the key was to neutralize the miasma that had been absorbed. He continued, clarifying that once the miasma was cancelled out, the creature would begin reverting closer to its state before the transformation. With that change, the battle would no longer be overwhelming. Finally, Ishua directed his attention to Diana, making it clear that from that point onward, she only needed to proceed steadily and bring the monster down little by little. Diana dismissed the idea of defeating the monster slowly, believing that once it had been reduced to that weakened state, there was no need to hold back. Lilian immediately understood her intent and completed the thought, recognizing that prolonging the fight was no longer necessary. Lilian unleashed her power, bringing forth the concept of a blade that could cut through all things. Within the world she had created, she shaped the strongest weapon she could imagine. In that instant, Diana's sword shone with an intense light as she raised it high. Ishua reacted with clear surprise at the overwhelming output, recognizing it as the true power of a hero. Diana moved forward without hesitation, driving her attack with full force. This time, her strike did not fail. In a single motion, the blade cut cleanly through the Ogre King, splitting its body in half and bringing the battle to an end. After the fight, the tension faded as they gathered together. Diana extended her hand toward Ishua, and the two acknowledged each other. She then brought Lilian forward, noting that she was the one she had mentioned before. Lilian remained partially hidden behind her, her composure slipping as she struggled with her shyness. Encouraged to step forward properly, she managed to present herself, though still flustered. Ishua recognized her from their earlier encounter at the castle, when he had been invited to join Alan's party. The realization that she was the hero left him genuinely surprised. Lilian, in turn, felt overwhelmed knowing that he remembered her. Observing her behavior, Ishua quietly noted that she seemed even more reserved than Arya. Diana soon returned to the matter at hand, pointing out how unusual the miasma had been earlier, especially given their proximity to the World Tree. With that in mind, she decided that they should return to the elf village once more to investigate further. Ishua agreed, thinking that if they were dealing with a hero, they might at least gain some understanding of the situation. However, as they looked ahead, all of them froze at the sight before them. The World Tree, Idrasil, was beginning to wither. Lilian immediately urged everyone to hurry and head toward the elf village. In Ishua's thoughts, he recognized that this was exactly what one would expect from a hero, seeing her as reliable in times of emergency. At the entrance, the gatekeeper noticed them and recognized them as the same group from earlier. Lilian identified herself as the hero, presenting her identification and explaining that they had come to investigate the area around the elf village. The gatekeeper showed hesitation, uncertain if she was truly the real one this time. He expressed concern, mentioning that ever since a man claiming to be a hero had entered, things had been strange, and he feared she might be another imposter. Ishua reassured him that they would check the situation, and the guard decided to entrust the matter to them. As they ran forward, Ishua found it hard to believe that he was about to pass through the elf village in such a rushed manner. Arya also felt the same, as they had originally planned to take things easily and simply sightsee. As they approached their destination, members of the elf council were already gathered ahead. They overheard a voice shouting in distress, repeatedly insisting a lack of knowledge. Both Arya and Ishua immediately recognized the voice, their eyes widening. Moving closer, they saw the elf queen surrounded by council members, while Alan stood nearby, covering his ears. A few days earlier, the king had summoned Alan, the hero, instructing him to report his accomplishments. Alan, clenching his teeth in frustration, thought about how he was being asked to report at a time when the incompetent members had already fled. Having been staying in Nabish, he had received the summons and returned to the royal capital. During the assembly, the royal herald raised his hand and praised him as a world-renowned, top-class hero acknowledged by the king. The herald spoke of how his recent achievements must be remarkable, referencing another hero, Lilian, who had defeated Ifrit, one of the 4 heavenly kings serving directly under the demon lord, and encouraged Alan to proceed with his report. However, Alan hesitated, stating only that his level had increased slightly. The royal herald reacted with surprise at the minimal report. Alan then added that he was currently working on conquering an A-rank dungeon and intended to complete it soon before moving on to an S-rank dungeon. The king raised his voice in anger, putting an end to the discussion. He expressed that he had grown tired of hearing the same reports and demanded to know the whereabouts of Ishua, stating a desire to hear his genuine perspective on completing the dungeon. Alan became irritated, questioning in his mind why Ishua's name had been brought up at that moment. He felt uneasy, realizing that if it became known that Ishua was the only one left in the party, the reaction from others would be unpredictable. Alan responded that Ishua was not feeling well. The king reacted with concern, questioning his condition. Alan continued, explaining that Arya was with him and that he was simply resting and taking it easy, so there was no need for concern. Sweat formed on Alan's face as he clenched his teeth. In his thoughts, Alan focused on getting through the situation by avoiding further questions. He believed that if he could produce results by the next report, he would be able to recover his standing. The king continued to stare at him, and Alan shut his eyes tightly under the pressure. The royal herald moved the matter forward, addressing him again as Hero Alan. The king then assigned him an urgent quest, instructing him to discuss it with Ishua and proceed accordingly. Later, as a carriage moved along its path, Alan observed the sight ahead. His gaze fixed on the world tree, Idrasil, noting that its size far exceeded what he had expected. While looking out the window, Alan thought about how he had heard that promoted monsters could appear in that area, yet they had not encountered a single one. Suddenly, he struck the roof of the carriage and called out to the coachman, questioning whether powerful monsters truly came from around that place. The coachman confirmed that such reports had indeed been received and explained that the area was currently closed because of it. Alan climbed up onto the roof of the carriage, reflecting on how, without knowing any of this, the hero Lilian had set off on a quest just before the closure. He dismissed the idea of her being an up-and-coming hero, regarding it as foolish. The coachman reacted with surprise, mentioning that he had heard she was noble, strong, and beautiful. Alan brushed this off, thinking instead that she looked small and unimpressive. In his thoughts, Alan concluded that he should assist the popular and carefree hero who had entered a dangerous area. He pictured Lilian and the swordswoman with her, and believed that if he could quickly uncover the cause of the situation, all of his past mistakes would be erased. Sitting on top of the carriage roof, he reasoned that the rumors about vicious monsters might simply be false, making the task easy. He felt that luck had finally turned in his favor. With a sharp glare and clenched teeth, he thought that everything could have been resolved without trouble if things had gone differently, directing that frustration toward Ishua. Eventually, he arrived at the elf village, noting that he had reached it without any incidents. An elf stopped him, pointing out that another human had arrived and stating that no one could enter without permission. As he climbed the stairs, Alan wondered if Lilian had come here as well. He then asked the gatekeeper about her presence. The gatekeeper questioned his identity. In response, Alan presented his identification and declared that he was a hero who had come under the king's orders to investigate. The gatekeeper found it unusual for a hero to act alone, questioning whether such a thing was even possible. At that moment, the door suddenly opened, and a girl permitted him to enter. She introduced herself as Chelsea, the elf queen. In Alan's thoughts, he found the queen to be cute. The elf queen explained that the situation was not something that could be hidden forever, and with no solution in sight, the time had come to seek cooperation from humans. She warned that it could develop into a major turmoil that might engulf the world and urged him not to act recklessly. In his mind, Alan questioned whether it was truly that serious and whether it was even something he could handle. He recalled the king's earlier words about reporting his accomplishments and clenched his teeth in frustration. He decided to listen to their story first, and if the situation turned out to be too dangerous, he would simply leave. As Alan walked through the elf village, he observed the state of the elves. In his thoughts, their expressions appeared gloomy, making him wonder if the situation was truly that severe. He then questioned what had happened to Lilian, thinking that other heroes should have come before him. The elf queen clarified that he was the only human who had entered the village recently, as the area had been restricted. In his mind, Alan realized that Lilian was not there and considered whether he should find her first. However, he recalled the royal herald's praise of Lilian defeating Ifrit, one of the demon king's 4 heavenly kings under direct command. With a serious expression, he concluded that this was his opportunity, believing that if he could resolve the situation on his own, the king would have no choice but to acknowledge him. Queen Chelsea then led him further, indicating that they had arrived. As Alan looked up, he saw the world tree, Idrasil. He was struck by its immense size when seen up close, but also noticed that its roots appeared to be rotting. Queen Chelsea confirmed that Idrasil was rapidly losing its vitality and that the purification of miasma was not proceeding as they had hoped. While observing her, Alan thought about how monsters were becoming more violent. He realized that if the situation continued, the entire region could become uninhabitable and questioned whether it was beyond his control. Queen Chelsea questioned Alan on whether he could handle the situation. In his mind, Alan considered that it would be better to come up with a convincing excuse and leave. Alan responded with a composed expression, stating that he had only come to investigate. Alan recalled the royal herald's reaction and the sharp remark questioning if that was all. He also remembered the anger on the king's face as he demanded to know Ishua's whereabouts. Alan lowered his head. Queen Chelsea noticed the change and questioned him. Alan admitted that he was a hero and asked that the matter be left to him. In his thoughts, he realized he had already said it, yet he convinced himself that this was the only way for him to recover his standing. Queen Chelsea reacted with urgency, questioning if it was truly possible to handle the situation. Alan affirmed it, relying on the fact that he was a hero. He then suddenly stepped forward, deciding that he had no other choice. In his view, it was only a tree, and with some healing magic, it should recover quickly. Queen Chelsea showed approval, and one of the Elf Council members added that even their own efforts under Project Idrasil had failed to resolve the issue. Alan turned sharply at that mention. In his thoughts, he realized that even a specialized group of elves could not cure it, meaning simple recovery magic would not be enough. Still, he reached out and touched the world tree. In his mind, he considered his next move and cast a high-level recovery spell meant to heal even life-threatening injuries. With focused eyes, he reassured himself, recalling that he had left healing responsibilities to Arya before, and others might not know about his ability. He felt a quiet sense of pride in being able to use healing magic despite serving as the vanguard. Suddenly, part of the tree cracked and broke. Alan was caught off guard. Queen Chelsea reacted, unable to accept what had just happened, knowing that basic healing magic would not work in this situation. Facing them, Alan insisted that he was aware of that much and that his actions were only preparation. In his thoughts, he considered that if the tree was affected by miasma, it might be treated as some kind of abnormal condition. He touched the tree again and cast spells aimed at recovery and poison removal. The Elf Council and Queen Chelsea watched him, their expectations fading. They questioned whether this was truly what a hero was supposed to be. Some noted that if such methods were enough, they would not have struggled this long, while another pointed out that miasma was a mixture of curse and mana, not a simple abnormal condition. Hearing this, Alan clenched his teeth. In his mind, Alan rejected the situation, questioning what he would even report to the king if he achieved no results. As he looked closely at the roots, he observed that they were the only parts growing abnormally large. He considered that their discoloration might be caused by absorbing a massive amount of miasma. He then drew his sword. In his thoughts, he came to a conclusion and believed he had understood the cause. Declaring that the act was over, he prepared to demonstrate the power of a hero. Queen Chelsea reacted and questioned his intentions, but Alan dismissed the concern and proceeded. Raising his sword, he called forth a holy blade, and as it manifested, it emitted a bright glow before striking the tree. The Queen and the Elf Council were left in shock. Queen Chelsea reacted with alarm, realizing something had gone terribly wrong. Alan insisted that he had removed the source of the miasma, believing that it had accumulated in that area and caused the abnormal growth. However, his eyes widened as he noticed something unexpected. The miasma was spreading through the trunk. The Elf Council stood stunned. Queen Chelsea collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed, realizing the gravity of the situation. She understood that Idrasil was dying. In her devastation, she recognized that those roots were not the cause of the problem, but rather the tree's own defensive instinct, its final line of defense against the miasma. Alan turned in shock as he grasped the meaning of her realization. The Elf Council reacted one after another, questioning his actions and condemning what he had done. Some even suspected that he was aligned with the Demon King. Alan turned away, rejecting their accusations in his thoughts, insisting that he had not known. Overwhelmed, he covered his ears, unable to accept the consequences of his actions. He repeated to himself that he had no idea, that he knew nothing about it, and that it was not his intention. Then, suddenly, a voice called out. Alan froze, recognizing it immediately. With his teeth clenched, he turned toward the source, realizing that Ishua had appeared. Ishua raised his voice as he called out to Alan, reacting to what had been done to the world tree. One of the Elf Council members revealed that the hero had cut off the roots that were sealing the miasma. Hearing this, Ishua leapt forward, unable to understand why such an action had been taken. Queen Chelsea then turned her attention to Lilian and questioned her identity. Lilian identified herself as a hero and recognized Chelsea as the Queen of the Elves. She lowered her head, appearing close to tears. Queen Chelsea reflected that such a title meant little now, as failing to protect Idrasil and losing the elven village would strip her of the right to be called a queen. Lilian refused to accept that outcome and quickly lifted her gaze, insisting that it was still too early to fall into despair. Meanwhile, Ishua placed his hand on the world tree and closed his eyes. Ishua realized that the world tree was still alive and asked for the chance to try to heal it. Queen Chelsea reacted with uncertainty, while one of the Elf Council members objected, arguing that the current disaster had already happened because they trusted humans, and they could not rely on someone they did not know. Lilian quietly spoke to Queen Chelsea, explaining that Ishua was still a novice adventurer and only a mana porter, yet she firmly believed in him. She was certain that he would eventually become someone capable of saving the world. Queen Chelsea paused, carefully considering those words. She looked at Ishua, then made a firm decision to trust him, choosing to believe in his resolve. The elf council reacted with shock at her decision. Queen Chelsea stood with a serious expression, realizing that if nothing was done, Idrasil would certainly die. Taking action was better than doing nothing. She then pointed forward and gave an order to capture Alan. 2 elf guards immediately restrained him as he struggled. Alan urged Ishua to help him, appealing to him as his leader. However, his plea was ignored. In his thoughts, Ishua accepted the weight of the responsibility as he placed his hand against the tree once more. A faint light began to surround him. As expected, he could feel that the flow of mana was unstable. The impurities caused by the miasma were severely disrupting the circulation. With the miasma spreading so far, simply trying to neutralize it would not be enough, as the world tree would fail before that could happen. He realized that the severed portion that once isolated the miasma had to be restored. To achieve this, Ishua created a mana hole. The elf council watched in shock as a distorted magic circle formed. Black energy began to gather and swirl at its center, drawing in the miasma. Ishua understood that the circle had formed in a distorted way due to the severe lack of dark mana. When there is a difference in mana density between attributes, the denser mana naturally flows toward the less dense one. This principle had originally been used as a method to draw mana away from monsters. Then Ishua created multiple mana holes around Idrasil, allowing the miasma to be drawn in at a faster rate. Ishua then instructed Lilian to create similar magic circles in areas where the miasma was strongest. Lilian reacted with urgency and quickly prepared to follow his instruction, while Ishua acknowledged that he could not reach the higher areas himself. In Lilian's thoughts, the moment her name was called, her heart began to beat faster. Now floating near the top of the world tree, she focused on forming the magic circles, realizing that creating them one after another was simple. However, Ishua's control over mana felt almost miraculous to her. Soon, another black vortex formed at the center of her magic circle. As she hovered before the massive tree, she found herself in awe, realizing she had never known such a method existed. In her mind, she believed that this approach could truly succeed. Queen Chelsea watched in disbelief, unable to fully understand what he was doing. Ishua glanced upward with a faint smile, then lowered his gaze again, acknowledging in his thoughts that he was nothing more than a mana porter. He urged Lilian to keep going, maintaining his focus on the task. Suddenly, one of the elves shouted in alarm. Queen Chelsea immediately questioned the situation, believing that they had finally found a glimmer of hope. However, another elf reported that the elven village was being overwhelmed by monsters. Shock spread among them as the realization set in that it was an abnormal outbreak, possibly a stampede. Lilian understood that the world tree's ability to purify miasma had completely stopped, causing the monsters to grow even more active. While continuing his work, Ishua realized that if he stopped the treatment now, the world tree would die. There was no room to leave their positions. Diana, gripping her sword, expressed relief in her own way, as she had been concerned that they would remain idle. Still focused, Ishua entrusted Diana and Arya with holding back the monsters, knowing that if the world tree was restored, the monsters would weaken again. Diana immediately moved out to face the threat. Outside the elf village, Diana assessed the defensive structure, confirming that the barrier extended deep underground. With that assurance, she prepared alongside Arya. Ahead of them, a large horde of monsters gathered, closing in on the village. Diana noted that it was their first time working together, realizing that it would be a difficult fight. Meanwhile, the monsters that had appeared in the forest were being dealt with by the archers. Looking ahead, Diana decided to rely on the elves' archers for support while focusing on guarding the path in front of them. Arya then raised her weapon, which shone with sacred light, and released a powerful burst that pierced straight through a monster's body. Diana observed Arya's strength and, in her thoughts, found it remarkable how much power she could produce even without Ishua's support. The battle continued intensely as an elf rushed over, bringing the remaining mana potions gathered from the village, explaining that it was all that could be collected. Arya quickly took the potions and expressed her appreciation, ready to make use of them. At the same time, Diana stood within a magic circle that acted as a protective shield and activated enhancements to increase her sharpness and defense. Arya acknowledged that she could not maintain these enhancements for long without Ishua and urged caution. Diana then charged forward into the battlefield, cutting through the approaching monsters with decisive strikes, while Arya continued to attack from a distance with overwhelming force. An elf guard watching the scene recognized the incredible strength of the hero's companions but remained uncertain whether they could hold back the overwhelming number of enemies. He looked ahead at the endless wave of monsters advancing toward them. At the same time, Ishua and Lilian continued their efforts to restore the world tree. They repeatedly activated the mana hole technique as they worked across its vast structure. Ishua realized just how enormous the tree truly was, while Lilian noted that only a few more areas remained. In his thoughts, Ishua urged Arya and Diana to endure just a little longer. On the battlefield, a wild rabbit leapt onto Diana and grazed her arm with its horn, leaving a wound, but Arya quickly healed it. Diana acknowledged the help and continued cutting down the monsters around them, realizing that the battle was becoming increasingly exhausting. Arya then checked the potion supply and observed that they had already run out of mana potions, and at the same time, the miasma around them was growing thicker and thicker. The pressure continued to rise as they worked to prevent the monsters from breaching the walls, pushing themselves to eliminate every threat in front of them. Reinforcements had yet to arrive, and the situation remained uncertain. Despite everything, Diana resolved to hold the line for as long as possible, placing her hope in the recovery of the World Tree. Inside the elf village, an elf woman knelt before Queen Chelsea and reported that the enemies had already reached the fence and that it was only a matter of time before they broke through the village. Queen Chelsea immediately asked about the evacuation of the citizens. An elf man reported that they had already begun leaving through the back entrance. With a serious expression, Queen Chelsea reflected on the situation, realizing that while the miasma was steadily being drawn out, the monsters would likely arrive first. She then ordered those capable of fighting to head to the gate, declaring it an all-out war, and called for her bow. However, members of the Elf Council opposed the idea, insisting that she should not go herself. Meanwhile, Ishua remained focused with his eyes closed. In his thoughts, he sensed that the miasma had begun to fade and that the flow of mana was gradually returning. He believed that only a little more effort was needed. Outside, Diana was struck in the thigh. Arya reacted immediately, closing her eyes as she prepared to cast healing magic. However, she suddenly clutched her head in pain, unable to continue. Diana realized that Arya had run out of mana, and Diana ordered the others to move Arya to the back. As she endured the pain from her wound, she looked ahead and realized that the monsters were continuing to advance toward them without stopping. Nearby, an elf archer reported that the wall would not hold much longer. Diana stared ahead, momentarily blank, acknowledging the harsh situation. She tightened her grip on her sword, recognizing that even as the Sword Saint, she was once again being pushed to the point of preparing for death within the same day. She reflected that if they managed to survive, they would need to start their training again from the beginning. Her thoughts turned to Lilian, sensing that she was likely in a difficult situation as well. She realized that this was exactly the kind of moment where Ishua's presence would have made a difference. At that moment, then suddenly, two figures descended from the sky and landed within the horde of monsters. One of them wielded a magic sword known as Graham, striking down the monsters around her, while the other raised her staff and unleashed a surge of lightning across the battlefield, releasing the attack known as Thunder of Judgment. Everyone watching was left in shock, their eyes wide at the sudden turn of events. Diana tried to make sense of the arrival, while Arya recognized the figures, identifying them as Little and Mithia. A few weeks earlier, Alan's party had failed to conquer an A-rank dungeon. After that, Alan asserted himself as a man renowned across the continent as a hero. However, Mithia and Little chose to leave the party, expressing that they would simply look forward to his future accomplishments, leaving Alan alone in the forest. As Mithia and Little made their way with the intention of following Ishua, they suddenly heard cries for help. They discovered a carriage under attack by monsters resembling goblins, but with wings that allowed them to fly. Mithia considered that they should at least ensure the highways remained safe and properly maintained, while Little preferred to head straight to Nabish. Still, both of them believed that if Ishua were present, he would not ignore the situation. After everything they had gone through in the past few days, they also felt a strong urge to act freely. After defeating the monsters, Little found herself confused. While inside the carriage, she realized that despite wanting to head to Nabish quickly, they were now traveling in the opposite direction. Mithia agreed, recognizing that they could not simply abandon the passengers after all of their escorts had been wiped out. They decided to safely send them off first before continuing on to Nabish. Later, inside a luxurious dining room filled with an abundance of meat and fine food, Little questioned how they had ended up in such a setting, enjoying such a lavish meal. An elderly man expressed his gratitude for their help, acknowledging that the two of them had saved his daughters. It had been an unexpected outcome, as they had also ended up saving the life of a lord's daughter who had been suffering from illness. Little suddenly stood, feeling the need to leave, but the lord asked them to wait. He offered them a position to work for him as live-in escorts, explaining that he had been hoping to hire skilled individuals like them. Mithia declined the offer, expressing their gratitude but explaining that they were simply humble adventurers, and working under a noble was not suited for them. The lord insisted that, at the very least, they stay for one night, feeling that it would be improper to let those who had saved his daughter's life leave with only a meal. Little and Mithia exchanged hesitant looks before agreeing to his request. Later, Little found herself once again unable to understand how things had turned out this way. They were repeatedly asked to stay just one more night, and before they realized it, an entire week had passed. Mythia also expressed her desire to head to Nabish soon. Little, while looking at Ishua's strand of hair, thought that he had likely been staying in Nabish for some time, which led her to lower her guard. The next day, the Lord saw them off, expressing that they were always welcome to visit his territory again. Mythia and Little responded with smiles before departing. In her thoughts, Little believed that it was finally time to reunite with Ishua. However, later on she once again felt confused. Inside the guild, Mythia was surprised to learn from the receptionist that Ishua was not there. Little realized that they had become too relaxed. The receptionist explained that Ishua had gone to the elven village, having accepted a special request from the guild. Hearing this, Mythia decided that they would pursue him and left the guild with Little. Shortly afterward, however, an order was issued by the king, prohibiting entry into the area surrounding the village. This caused concern for both of them. Little still wished to follow Ishua, but she understood that when it came to the king's orders, they had no choice but to obey. Mythia, however, felt that they could not simply remain idle. She noted that Ishua had been handling all the remaining requests before leaving. The receptionist confirmed this. Mythia then looked at the table filled with pending requests and decided that while Ishua and the others were away, they would carry on in their place. Later that day, Mythia and Little completed several quests, including eliminating undead, searching for a lost puppy, assisting with deliveries, and helping take care of children in the village. After returning to the guild, they asked if there were any remaining quests left undone. With that, they gradually took on the role of handling leftover requests. Mythia encouraged Little to keep going, believing that when Ishua returned, she would make him acknowledge their efforts. The next day, Little once again found herself confused by the situation. The two of them were flying through the air, carried by a large bird. Little called out to Mythia before suddenly falling asleep, which caught Mythia off guard. She questioned how things had ended up like this, while Little casually noted that Mythia had been the one sleeping too much. During their quest to collect Renjetsu herbs, they had been attacked by the bird, and Mythia recalled that such a pattern usually meant they would be taken back to its nest, where they would become food for its chicks. She had no intention of letting that happen and planned to escape once their altitude dropped. However, Little observed that the bird seemed to be heading toward the elf village. Mythia then realized that this was where Ishua currently was. Even with the king's restrictions in place, entering the area this way could not be helped. The two of them shared a light moment at that thought. Mythia reasoned that since it was such a large bird, its nest would likely be near the world tree. However, she also noticed that the condition of the world tree did not look good. Upon arriving near the tree, they spotted Arya's group and immediately moved to assist them. Mythia stepped forward, using her sword to block incoming attacks before cutting down the monsters. Little supported from the side, striking with her staff and casting magic to eliminate enemies. As Arya watched them fight, she recognized their growth, noting that over the past few weeks they had become much more efficient in battle while conserving their mana. Diana, observing the same, found it surprising that someone like Alan, who had such capable companions, could perform so poorly. Little threw a mana potion toward Arya, urging her to use it. Arya accepted it with gratitude. Diana encouraged everyone not to fall behind and continued swinging her sword, cutting down the monsters around them. Mythia, watching the battle, was surprised and questioned who the swordswoman was, recognizing the level of skill being displayed. At that moment, Lilian descended from above and joined the fight, unleashing fire magic that wiped out nearby monsters, leaving everyone in awe. Mythia was stunned, realizing that this was the same Lilian known for defeating one of the 4 heavenly kings. Lilian then indicated that the mana holes had already been set up and that Ishua was currently channeling mana into them to neutralize the miasma, with only a little more remaining. Arya accepted this and focused on holding the line together with the others. The 5 of them continued to fight, keeping the monsters at bay. Meanwhile, Ishua remained fully focused on the world tree, continuing his effort to restore it. A few moments earlier, as Ishua and Lilian completed their work on Idrasil, one of the elves noticed that the falling leaves had begun to slow down. Ishua observed that the number of mana holes was already sufficient and concluded that the erosion caused by the miasma had likely stopped. He then turned his attention to Lilian, indicating that she should go and assist the others, and she moved to do so. Ishua placed his palms against the tree once more, focusing on the remaining task. What remained was to neutralize the miasma by pouring in opposing mana and to restore the lost circulation within the tree. The elves watching reacted with surprise, realizing that even after creating so many magic circles, Ishua was still able to channel a massive amount of mana into the world tree. In Queen Chelsea's thoughts, the level of magical power he displayed exceeded even her own as the leader of the elves. She understood that if he continued at this pace, he could distribute mana throughout every part of the tree without placing strain on its branches and leaves. She confirmed his name in her mind as Ishua and regarded him with deep admiration. Still focused, Ishua sensed the flow of mana gradually returning. It was beginning to circulate again, little by little, moving closer to full restoration. Soon, one of the elves noticed a change. The leaves had stopped falling. Another observed that it was not only that, the tree had begun to grow new leaves at a rapid rate. Yggdrasil's natural regenerative function had returned, and the tree quickly regained its vitality. Queen Chelsea was overcome with relief, feeling the renewed life flowing from Yggdrasil. Meanwhile, at the gate, Diana, Mythia, Little, Arya, and Lilian continued to fight against the incoming enemies. They formed a coordinated formation, working together to push back the monsters. As the battle continued, the miasma in the area had noticeably begun to thin out. Lilian informed the others that the falling leaves had already stopped and that the world tree's purification function had returned. Diana, leading the battle, pushed everyone to endure just a little longer. As they continued facing the enemies, they suddenly noticed something unusual as the monsters' movements began to slow. Soon after, the monsters started to retreat. Little recognized that the return of the purification function was weakening them, which caused their withdrawal. Arya sought confirmation in her thoughts, realizing that if that was the case, then the world tree had been saved. Diana affirmed this, acknowledging their success. Relief spread among them as they held their ground and defended the area. Back at the world tree, Queen Chelsea struggled to find a way to express her gratitude to Ishua. Meanwhile, Ishua focused on completing the final step. A magic circle formed and was placed into the tree, after which the world tree became surrounded by glowing runes. Queen Chelsea watched in disbelief. Ishua explained that these circles served as a storage of light attribute mana, which could be useful in the future if the purification function once again reached its limits. Queen Chelsea reflected on how far Ishua was willing to go for them. Before the moment could continue, Arya called out as she and the others returned from the battle. She rushed forward and embraced Ishua, while Ishua immediately checked her condition, concerned about any injuries. He felt gratitude toward Lilian and Diana for their efforts. Then, Ishua was surprised to see Mythia and Little, his former party members. Mythia moved forward and embraced him as well, while Little reacted, feeling that the gesture was unfair when directed toward Arya. Ishua had not expected that the two of them would come to help. Mythia believed that it was only natural for them to come, especially when it involved Ishua. Little added that they had simply been brought there by a bird through coincidence, something that was meant to remain a secret, which Mythia acknowledged. Queen Chelsea addressed Ishua as a mana porter and regarded him as a savior who had descended upon the elven village. She recognized that it was not only him, but all of them, Diana, Lilian, Arya, Little, and Mythia, acknowledging them as a remarkable group. Ishua clarified that they were not even a formal party and that it had only happened that they were all present at the same time. In her thoughts, Queen Chelsea found that difficult to believe, as their coordination felt as though they had worked together for years. Not only the elven village, but the entire region had been saved. With that, preparations began for a celebration that night, turning into a grand festival. Cheers echoed as they honored their saviors. The villagers brought out the finest ingredients they had and prepared special bottles of sake for the occasion. Joy spread throughout the crowd as people danced, drank, and shared in the feast. In the distance, Queen Chelsea and Ishua spoke quietly. She reflected on how, even without Alan delivering the final blow, she had believed that Yggdrasil was destined to die, and yet now the outcome felt almost unreal. Ishua looked at her with understanding. In his thoughts, he saw her not just as the queen of the elven village, but as the protector of the world tree, carrying a heavy burden as it faced the brink of destruction. Overcome, Queen Chelsea lowered herself and expressed her willingness to help Ishua whenever he needed it, promising her support. Ishua encouraged her to raise her head and, in return, expressed that the festival she had prepared was already more than enough for him. Queen Chelsea responded with a gentle smile, recognizing his selfless nature. Nearby, Arya enjoyed the celebration, becoming lively with the alcohol, determined to continue until she had finished her fruit wine. The elves cheered for Arya, praising her ability to drink, amazed that a saintess could handle alcohol so well. Ishua observed that the drink was sweet and easy to consume, yet its alcohol content was high, and Arya was drinking it from a mug. Arya believed that as a saint, she could purify drunkenness and considered herself unaffected. Ishua questioned this, noticing that she was already showing signs of being drunk. Arya brushed it aside and instead focused on drinking together with Ishua, pulling him into another embrace. Ishua was left stunned by her behavior. At another table, Lilian was seen in distress, struggling with her thoughts as she wondered why her feelings were not reaching Ishua. Diana questioned who had allowed Lilian to drink alcohol. Lilian began acting dramatically, convinced that someone like her, even as a hero, might be disliked. With a drink still in hand, she moved unsteadily, while Diana tried to bring her back under control. Ishua noticed that the situation at Diana and Lilian's table was also becoming chaotic. Both he and Diana exchanged looks, each dealing with their own intoxicated companion. After the night passed, morning arrived, and Ishua's group prepared to depart. Nearby, Inside a cage, Alan complained about his situation, unable to accept the treatment he was receiving despite considering himself a hero. One of the elves denied that Alan could be a hero, instead viewing him as someone who had attempted to destroy their village, likening him to a demon. Mythia agreed with the elf and, in her view, a situation like that did not even require a proper cage, they could just break his legs. Alan reacted with anger at those words. Ishua considered that it was necessary to report the matter to the king, yet Alan continued attempting to escape. Alan remained defiant, unable to accept the situation even after everything that had happened. As the group boarded the carriage, Ishua decided that they would stop by Nabish before heading to the royal capital. Queen Chelsea bid them farewell, expressing her sincere hope that they would return again. Ishua acknowledged the enjoyable festival and expressed his intention to visit again. With that, the group departed, making their way back toward Nabish. After some time, they returned to the newcomers' town of Nabish and entered the Adventurers Guild. Inside, the receptionist expressed relief upon seeing that Ishua was unharmed and noted that he had successfully regrouped with the others. She then explained that the situation around the elf village had turned severe, admitting that she did not know how to properly apologize for the inconvenience it had caused. Ishua responded in a light and composed manner, indicating that as she could see, they were all safe, and he expressed his intention to report the details of the quest immediately. Later, the receptionist reacted with disbelief upon hearing the full report. The monsters had grown more aggressive due to the deterioration of the world tree, and despite that, the group had managed not only to defeat a subspecies of the ogre king that had reached S rank, but also to restore the world tree itself. She then turned serious and pressed for clarification about Ishua's identity. In response, Ishua maintained that even if asked who he truly was, he considered himself nothing more than a regular mana porter. Behind him, the girls subtly shook their heads, clearly disagreeing with that claim and recognizing that he was far from ordinary. The receptionist then explained that what was meant to be a simple request of gratitude could no longer remain as it was, as the results warranted a significant increase in the reward. However, Ishua declined, insisting that he had done nothing special and that even the originally promised 30 gold coins already felt excessive. The receptionist remarked on his humility despite achieving results worthy of a hero. Behind him, Arya reflected that in Ishua's case, he genuinely believed he had done nothing remarkable, and that realization itself was unsettling. In the end, the receptionist concluded that regardless of everything, the request had been successfully completed, and she finalized it by stamping the document. After that, Lilian stepped forward to give her report. The receptionist noted the combination of the rising hero Lilian and Ishua, who possessed SSS-level magical power, and expressed a desire to witness such a pairing herself. Outside, Alan was loudly demanding to be released. The group then moved outside, where the receptionist pointed out that, in contrast, the hero present there was Alan, who was currently inside a cage. Alan continued shouting, insisting that the four of them were members of his hero party and that their achievements should also be considered his. From behind him, other guild members spoke up, pointing out that Alan had been the one who banished them. Others added that Alan had nearly delivered a fatal blow to the world tree and questioned whether he intended to start a war with the elves. Ishua came to the realization that it might have been better if Alan had remained outside the city after all. Mythia commented that it might be appropriate to let Alan experience some discomfort, considering how he had nearly abandoned her to die in an A-rank dungeon. Little observed that Mythia clearly held a grudge against Alan. Ishua then stated that the only thing left to do now was to head to the royal capital and report everything to the king. Later, inside the castle at the royal capital, the king welcomed their return and remarked that it was good to see them all back. He stated that he had already been informed of the outcome of the incident through an emissary sent by the elven queen, Chelsea, but expressed confusion over why Alan had acted on his own and made the situation worse. Arya explained that it was because Alan had expelled Ishua from the party, which led her and the others to question that decision and ultimately leave as well. The king reacted with anger toward Alan, while Alan in turn showed anger toward Arya for exposing his actions. The king then silenced Alan and directed his attention to Ishua, asking for confirmation. Ishua affirmed it and explained that Alan had removed him from the party, claiming that someone who could only provide mana was unnecessary. The king declared that reasoning to be foolish. While acknowledging that the Holy Sword was a unique ability befitting a hero, he pointed out that it was all Alan had, and emphasized that the party's formation had only been possible because of Ishua's wisdom and mana. Mythia then spoke, adding that after everything, Alan had lied to them and claimed that Ishua had left on his own, while forcing the rest of them to conquer an A-rank dungeon. Little also spoke about Alan, revealing that to make matters worse, when the situation became dangerous, he had attempted to sacrifice Mythia in order to escape. The king acknowledged this and came to the realization that Alan had already been alone by the time he was assigned to investigate the world tree, concluding that this meant Alan had deceived him. Alan tried to offer an explanation, but the royal herald stepped in and declared the matter settled, and the king agreed with that judgment. The king then declared that Alan would be stripped of his status as a hero. Alan reacted with urgency, insisting that he could still continue and that he would make a comeback. He then turned his attention to Ishua, attempting to invite him and the others back into his party so they could start over again. Mithia responded, questioning the purpose of such an idea at this point. Arya calmly intervened and conveyed that it was fine, stating that if Alan truly possessed the qualities of a hero, he would be able to rise again as a successful adventurer. Behind her, Mithia and Little shared the same impression that although Arya's gentle smile remained unchanged, there was a faint sense of something darker beneath it. Alan then questioned whether this meant he had to begin again from the very start as an adventurer. The king corrected his misunderstanding, explaining that the removal of his hero status was due to his failure to improve in his role, along with the fact that he had created a crisis between the kingdom and the elves, attempted to flee despite his duty to report the incident, and provided false reports to the crown. All of these were considered serious crimes. As a result, the king declared that Alan would be marked as a criminal, a mark he would have to carry for the rest of his life. Alan reacted with anger upon being branded as a criminal, finding the judgment unreasonable. Soon after, he was taken away by the guards. Later, the king called out to Ishua, while Ishua still showed concern for Alan. The king acknowledged Ishua's handling of the recent situation as truly admirable and expressed that if he had any wishes, he should make them known. Ishua responded modestly, indicating that he was not deserving of such praise, as he had already received a reward from the guild. The royal herald then suggested granting Ishua a domain along with a noble title, which the king considered an excellent idea. Ishua showed hesitation at the thought of becoming an aristocrat, while Arya expressed that it was an incredible opportunity, noting that a commoner could not become an aristocrat unless something extraordinary occurred. Ishua then expressed his gratitude to the king but asked to accept only his appreciation. The girls around him were visibly surprised by this refusal. Ishua acknowledged that it was a great honor, but emphasized that they were adventurers, and he wished to continue pursuing greater heights in that path. For him, traveling together with Arya and the others was the most enjoyable experience he had ever had. The king understood his decision and conveyed his support for Ishua's journey ahead. After that, Ishua and the rest of the girls departed. Diana then asked Lilian about her plans moving forward, questioning whether she intended to return to traveling with just the two of them again. Diana pointed out that if Lilian wished to form a party with Ishua, this moment presented the perfect opportunity after having fought together. The plan to assist them in a difficult situation had instead resulted in them being the ones receiving help. Lilian agreed with that realization and recognized that this was indeed her chance. As Lilian prepared to approach Ishua regarding the matter, Mithia suddenly moved forward toward him, once again asking to be included in his party along with Little. Lilian reacted to this sudden development. Ishua expressed his surprise, noting that the two of them should be in high demand, yet they still wished to join him. Mithia conveyed her belief that Ishua was an exceptional person and that, together with them, she was certain he would leave his name in history. Little added that Ishua's manner felt gentle and comforting. Ishua responded by saying that Little, Mithia, and even the king were exaggerating, but he admitted that he would truly be happy to have both of them join his party. Diana then urged Lilian to take the opportunity. Lilian finally stepped forward and asked to be included in Ishua's party as well. Ishua, Arya, Mithia, and Little were all caught off guard by her request. Diana remarked that the way Lilian expressed it felt similar to how a young girl would invite someone to play together. Ishua showed hesitation, reflecting on Lilian's reputation. He had heard that she had defeated Ifrit, one of the 4 heavenly kings under the direct command of the Demon King. From that, he believed that someone like her should be able to freely choose highly capable party members. Diana stepped in, questioning that line of thinking. She explained that during their time at the elf village, she had become convinced that gathering such talented individuals was not an easy task. Ishua then looked toward Arya, and Arya acknowledged that Lilian was an outstanding individual and a true hero, unlike Alan, and she supported the idea. Ishua accepted this and came to a decision. Soon after, the 4 of them knelt down and declared their intention to join Lilian's party. Lilian reacted in shock, as the situation had turned out the opposite of what she intended, since she was the one who wished to join Ishua's party. Ishua then explained that if a hero was part of a party, that hero should naturally take the role of leader. Lilian became flustered and turned to Diana, unsure of what to do next. Diana advised that if that was Ishua's way of thinking, it would be best to accept it. Ishua then reaffirmed the formation once more, naming each member, the Mana Porter Ishua, the Saintess Arya, the Magic Swordsman Mithia, the Sage Little, the Sword Saint Diana, and the Hero Lilian. With that, a new hero party was formed. Meanwhile, inside the Demon King's castle, a dark plan was beginning to take shape. One of the 4 heavenly kings, Ifrita, expressed that they should have advanced their forces as originally intended. Another of the 4 heavenly kings, Undine, criticized him, pointing out that his thinking was as simple as his strength, and noted that he had just been defeated by a hero. Ifrita responded by turning the criticism back on Undine, stating that her own plan had ended in complete failure. Undine maintained that her strategy had been flawless in theory. A third member of the four heavenly kings, Sylphie, supported the idea behind the plan, explaining that sending an excessive amount of miasma to the world tree to weaken it, then launching a decisive attack to destroy the elven village and use it as a base for future invasions, had not been a bad strategy. Gnome, another of the four heavenly kings, added that he had been confident in his subspecies ogre king, believing it would be enough to defeat the young hero Lilian. Undine then pointed out that Ishua's presence had been an unexpected factor, describing him as almost unfair. Ifrita noted how Ishua had neutralized the miasma as if it were nothing unusual. Sylphie added that it was also unclear how Ishua had managed to enter the hero's barrier. Gnome further emphasized the fact that Ishua had dispelled the miasma that had spread across the entire world tree. Hearing all of this, another voice questioned whether such abilities were even possible for a human. That voice belonged to the Demon King. Undine confirmed that it was, explaining that Ishua's mana reserves, combined with his extraordinary control over it, made him overwhelmingly powerful. Sylphie concluded that this was likely the reason the hero Lilian had chosen to work with him. Gnome agreed, recognizing that this made the situation highly troublesome. Ifrita then stated that there was no point in relying on tricks anymore, and that they would have to push forward with brute force. The Demon King agreed with that approach, acknowledging its logic. As the four heavenly kings listened, the Demon King continued, explaining that even in a direct confrontation, they could not afford to waste their strength. Since their opponent was the hero's party, he decided that they would use another human hero against them. Undine questioned whether there could be a hero willing to cooperate with them, and the Demon King confirmed that such a possibility existed. The Demon King then revealed a screen showing Alan, who was filled with anger and unable to take on any proper quests due to the mark placed upon him. In his frustration, Alan directed his resentment toward Ishua. With that in mind, the Demon King proposed the idea of bringing the fallen hero over to their side.